Welcome back to, wow, I almost said the other intro. Welcome back to Daily Flip. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we're going to be rolling through a story talking about how Democrats actually predicted the future. I know that's interesting, and for anybody who isn't paying attention to the Wall Street Journal op-ed section, you wouldn't have noticed this article, but I promise you it's an interesting one, and we're going to dive on into it. It talks about how Vought actually is implementing the Project 2025 narrative. And with that, let's actually jump into our daily debate. So the question for today is, did you believe Donald Trump? I think I asked this question more live time when he said, hey, we're not reading Project 2025. I haven't read Project 2025. I'm sure there's some good ideas. I'm sure there are some bad ideas. Did you believe him then? I know that I believed him to some degree, though. I believe he's probably had more context than he said he did, though I'm sure he didn't read all of it. But we'll get into the rest of my opinion in a little bit. I want to know yours. Throw it down in the comment section. With that, let's actually go to the article. This one comes from the Wall Street Journal opinion section, like I said. The headline reads, Kamala Harris is keeping her promise, by James Freeman. And the first line really caught me when I first looked at this article. Quote, most of us media folk endeavor to hold politicians accountable when they lie to voters. And so it's only fair to laud those public servants who distinguish themselves with kept promises. And he goes on in the second paragraph to say, quote, this column attended the, and I love how he says this column. He could just say I attended, but that probably sounds a little too self-focused. So he says this column. Sounds over the top, but whatever. This column attended the Democratic National Convention in Chicago last year and was assured by numerous Democrats that if elected, Donald Trump would begin implementing the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, end quote. Now, what is he doing from Project 2025? Well, here's some of the overview that you could talk about. Quote, the Trump administration has frozen $2.1 billion in federal funds allocated for Chicago in the latest budgetary maneuver targeting Democratic priorities and projects during the continuing government shutdown. And then here's another part that they would say is actually really important to the overall idea. And this is from actually an article that a section that Vought had done in Project 2025, probably 2 to 3 years ago. Quote, in its opening words, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution makes it abundantly clear that the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. That enormous power is vested not in departments or agencies, in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations, or other equities and interests close to the government. The President must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. And here is the more important line that we're quoting from Vaught's previous writing. Quote, the modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendencies to delegate its lawmaking powers to agency bureaucracies, end quote. And whether you like Donald Trump or not, I think even if you love him, even if you hate him, you can at least acknowledge that he has vested, much like presidents in the past, he has vested a lot of extra responsibilities within the executive, and he is testing the limit of presidential power, and he is actively trying to take on this definition of presidential power, which does not permit itself to allow delegation of its powers to agencies underneath the executive itself. Now, you may be saying, whoa. What does that actually mean, Alex? It sounds like a whole bunch of political, philosophical gibbly-gook. And yes, that's fair. But though Donald Trump doesn't love to take responsibility for his problems, he does, at least in this case, agree with the sentiment that the buck stops with him. And I think you could make an argument that he believes that there can be bad people underneath him, that there are people he'll blame instead of himself. But his philosophy seems to be that I am the president, I am setting the agenda, and anyone who doesn't fall in line is a malcontent. Now, does that mean that it's good or bad? I would say it's half dozen or the other, because while the power of the executive is indeed vested in the person, or the executive is vested in the president, who is elected and therefore can set the agenda and therefore can list what his goals are, and his objectives and how he wants executive power to be used, that doesn't mean that he gets to break the fundamental rules of this nation, or, and more importantly, the fundamental rule of this nation, the Constitution, and the separation of powers that allow for other bodies to check his power. What Vaught outlines is that the executive has been given too much power, and within that framework, Donald Trump will operate and stop the bureaucracies, the administrative bodies that exist within the executive branch but seem to operate independent, can operate independent of the president's prerogative. And that's a tall task, no doubt. So why is this important? Why is this coming up for this article and from this author? One, because Vaught was a major proponent of Project 2025, and this is outlined in such, but because it is a fulfillment of part of Project 2025. Even this author admits that there are some parts that are terrible, but that's going to happen, or parts that he doesn't like that aren't good. He doesn't say the word terrible. But of course that's going to happen, that there are some things you agree with and some that you don't, when it is an amalgamation, a consortium of different conservative thinkers from all across the political spectrum, on the conservative side of the aisle at least, from your libertarians to your big governments, your neocons to your populists. All these different strands live within, or all these different cables live within this giant bundle of lane cable that is currently working its way through DC. And whether or not any one of them wins out, any one of them gets a better performance, provides a better signal, is able to get their message out there and cultivate a following beyond this presidency, where the tent has become so big that it's hard to truly understand and see a path forward where any one of these can come out on top unscathed. We have to always keep it in perspective. When these politicians say, hey, we're trying to bring together these people on the right, we need to open up the tent, we're going to allow for all these different positions to lie within our coalition. Because while that may be true, and they may believe in the overall mission, Project 2025 was a project that outlined broad conservatism, but honestly propped up a really strong executive. That's what I was trying to get at here, and that's why I think this article is important. They have vested so much power in Donald Trump, and it could have been any president, but it was the personality of Donald Trump that can be extremely dangerous. Leaving it in the hands of an executive, trusting the executive to not be a flawed person, trusting the one person who has probably the most power within our system. That's not to say that the legislators or the Supreme Court, either institution as a whole, has more power, but that would still be dispersed between multiple people. Trusting that this person is incorruptible, has the best interest of everybody at heart, and can make the best decisions is foolish, naive, and why our founders laid out a different path, or at least a limited path for the power of the president. And when Project 2025 first came out, I remember saying, well, even if Trump doesn't know what it is, even if Trump isn't paying attention, even if Donald Trump doesn't really care, the people around him do. I wasn't speaking about Vaught at that time. I just thought it was more than likely that Rubio would be involved, at least if not in the Senate and on the ground, working with the president. I didn't say the Secretary of State, but I did say that Rubio would be around. Many people in his orbit will be following Project 2025. Vaught, of course, is a great example. Pete Hegseth is a person who didn't necessarily shame it in the media. You could keep going on with all the different people that not only took the trainings in order to be prepared to be put into the administration, but also all the people who genuinely believed Project 2025, even if they weren't involved in the creation of it. And it's a modern conservative response to a problem that's been pervasive. But will we be able to scale back after this? It's a crucial question. If we use the power and weight of the executive in order to dismantle said executive, are we going to be able to walk back from the brink? I don't know if a party of populists, a party that has imbibed the populism as a person who is surrounded by it, I don't know if we can walk back from there. I really don't. A generation has been defined by the political movement now, and I don't see them getting less into the strain of ideology that they believe. But hey, I could very well be wrong. I've changed my ideology before. I've changed my beliefs before. Other people can as well. I hope it just won't take a overuse of government power in order to get there. So, with all that said, if you want to read today's article, it will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post the links to these episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as on Tuesday and Thursday. I post the links to 6 and 6, which is our international news segment. It's about 6 minutes, and we're trying to cover 6 stories from around the world in those 6 minutes or less. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.